Michelle, would you like to introduce yourself a little further and please give us some details of your involvement in advocating for women's sex-based rights?
Ko Michelle Uriarau, taku ingoa, ko Ngati Henepare, rawa ko Ngati Mahu, ngō hapu o te iwi o Ngati Kahungunu. And I also am coming to you from Gunditjmara country, and I pay my respects to their tupuna, past, present and emerging. So my involvement in advocating for women's sex-based rights is actually fairly recent. As Janet was saying in the introduction, I've only come to advocating for women's sex-based rights because of a uni course that I took a few years ago. So this is all fairly new to me. As a result, I've done lots of reading and lots of listening to podcasts and, joining live streams like this so that I could, educate myself. But I started in earnest in 2019 with the creation of Women's Action Group Southwest Victoria with my co-founders Lisa Owen and Sonia Stoneman. And the main purpose of Women's Action Group was to address the self-ID legislation in Victoria, which ended up passing anyway. But, we did all the kind of grassroots, groundwork that you normally would do, writing to, every single Victorian MP, getting a lot of, no responses from Labor and from the Greens. We did meet up with a few MPs, but they were, they're all conservative, which was good, I guess, in a way. But we also joined forces with Victorian Women's Guild, which at the time was a new group as well, in this type of groundwork. The other thing we did too was we held, because gender identity was, well, to us at least, a new movement, we weren't really sure how people in our local area if they thought about it or if they knew what was going on. We live in a regional area. So we held meetings at Lisa's beautiful home. Thank you to Lisa for that, with local people, decision makers and not decision makers, just to, discuss our concerns and to talk it through. And the other things we've done, we've attempted to, have the Federal Health Minister, Greg Hunt, conduct a national inquiry into gender dysphoria. I think everyone knows about this anyway, which of course was unsuccessful. We've created a petition to the Minister for Women and various ministers for science. I think we're on the third one now, I've lost count, and that petition, was for basically saying that, the Australia's leading institute for science has redefined the word woman, not man. They haven't redefined the word man. Anyway, so we've still had no response from that petition to this day. Just that kind of work, basically. We've also got our Facebook page. And the reason for that was so that we could obviously, connect and network with other feminists and women's groups as well around this issue. I also used to previously sit in on the monthly WHRC Australia and New Zealand meetings, but I resigned at the start of the year, citing motherhood and homeschooling duties as my excuse. So, gosh, that was a big fat lie. So I apologise for that. But in reality, I just could not ignore the need for a Māori presence in this fight. So I'm also proud to say that I am a founding member of ManaWāhineKōrero. The translation of that, by the way, means Sovereign Women Speak. We're about two months old, something like that. And my fellow founding member, Diane, presented in last month's panel. So ManaWāhineKōrero started through my membership with another New Zealand feminist group called Women's Liberation Aotearoa. So shout out to them. So the primary focus of ManaWāhineKōrero is the protection and the preservation of the integrity of our Māoritanga, so our culture, which by default is also the protection of wahine, which is woman, and tamariki, which is children. And this is all in direct response to, the gender identity social contagion and relevant legislation currently before New Zealand Parliament, which is sex self-ID, and Conversion Practices Prohibition Bill. To us, it seems that hapu, which is, sub-tribes of Māori, are largely unaware of the gender identity social contagion and the impacts of these proposed bills and the threat that they pose to our culture. Our belief is that both the sex self-ID and the Conversion Practices Prohibition Bills are in breach of He Whakaputanga, which is New Zealand's Declaration of Independence, which, by the way, covers both Māori and Pākehā, and Te Tiriti o Waitangi, which is our Treaty of Waitangi, and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So ManaWāhineKōrero have made written submissions on both these proposed legislative changes, and we've also put in a request to make oral submissions, but we're yet to receive a date and time for that. So we do have a Facebook page. It's a private one, it's by invitation only, and the reason for that is basically matters of cultural preservation. Much like wahine, we do need our own space. We also have a YouTube channel, check us out. It's under ManaWāhineKōrero. And, basically, our efforts are aimed at raising awareness among hapu, among, the sub-tribes, to get the conversation started. But by the same token, we're not an educational group, so we try to make that distinction, okay? The other thing too, we don't pretend to speak for all Māori, and it's really important to understand that, because at the minute, gender identity extremists actually are doing that, okay, which we obviously object to. And an example of that is an organisation called Rainbow Midwives Alliance, who people here have probably already heard of. They petitioned a witch hunt against a woman by the name of Millie Hill last month. Now, the woman behind Rainbow Midwives Alliance she's from Durham, she's not Māori, yet she spoke as if she represented all Māori. And she used our culture and our treaty as an excuse to endorse her witch hunt. And she also held up academia as an authority on Māoritanga, which is completely false. So hapu have never used te tiriti to deplatform a wahine from her mahi or her work. It's a flippant and fraudulent use of te tiriti o Waitangi. Now, our tikanga, our culture, is preserved and handed down by our kaumātua, our elders, and our rangatira, our leaders. Actually, it's academia that consult our kaumātua and our rangatira about our culture, not the other way around. And that's because academia is not a Māori institution, which I'm pretty sure is blatantly obvious. Anyway, in closing, we just want to make it clear that, we don't have any word native to te reo, to our language, that translates to the words gender or transgender. None at all. Our culture has always understood and respected the biological reality of wahine and tane. In Te Ao Māori, there is a synergy between wahine and land, and that without one or the other or both, man cannot survive. In other words, he wahine, he whenua kaura te tangata. In other words, only wahine can bring forth life. Kia ora.
What made you first realise that transgenderism is a threat to women's rights?
I first realised what was happening with transgenderism as a result of a university course that I took at the end of 2017, or rather I enrolled at the end of 2017. So the university course was about Indigenous Australia, and at first it was fabulous. I loved it because that's the type of stuff that I'm really into. But by the second assignment, we'd been given, I thought it was a joke, we'd been given the genderbread person resource material for our second assignment. And it was clear, I felt like I'd been living under a rock because everyone else seemed to be like totally on board. They knew what was going on. I was like none the wiser. Plus, I think I was like one of the older students there anyway. And for me, I thought it was actually incongruent to an Indigenous perspective, right? Because there's women's business and all that type of stuff. Like, I'm pretty sure I just assumed that everyone knew that. But like Virginia said too, I also noticed the change in language, cis woman, cis lesbian, calling women womb havers, all that type of stuff. Also the erasure of wahine, or woman, from pretty much everything. And also like medically experimenting on children. Like, to me, it all sounded like colonization. That's what a lot of Indigenous peoples have gone through, around the world. So, and I know that, a lot of people say, oh, you're a woman first and, then your culture second. But the reality is I've always been my culture first. That's just something I was raised in my culture. So I'll always look at the world around me. It's called Te Ao Māori. I'll always look at the world around me in that manner first, and then, and then through, being a woman. So I was told to educate myself, which is what I did. And yeah, so here I am. The other thing too, though, that I've never really talked about publicly is that I did spend half of my childhood in a cult. So on my mother's side of my family, we, as a child, or I was a child, we went into a cult in New Zealand. Probably the most traumatic experience of my life. So I'm well aware of what mantras do, trans woman or woman, all that type of stuff. And, the brainwashing techniques as well. For me, this transgender movement is, it's soaking with all this type of, mind control, and also like, everyone, it's almost as if they all know, but they don't really think about it. That was the other thing that struck me too, is because I recognize it as well, because when you're in a cult, when you're brainwashed, you don't even question, you don't challenge, you don't even think to question or challenge. So in a way, I do have, empathy for the young, the rangatahi, or the young children as well, the young people, young adults who are swept up by all of this stuff, because, I know what it's like. But it took me years of therapy to get over it, to actually work through the motions, and I'm 50 years of age now. So, yeah, so that's how I first realised that transgenderism was a threat to women's rights. Thank you.
Is there an area of activity where you're focusing your efforts to resist gender identity ideology, and where's it taking you?
At the minute, there is an area, and I'm currently focusing my efforts with ManaWāhineKōrero, and that's purely because at the minute those bills that I spoke about earlier are currently before New Zealand Parliament, and also to, trying to encourage hapu, sub-tribes to talk about this gender identity ideology. So where has it taken me? So I've been doing a lot of reading and research into our founding documents, which is He Whakaputanga and Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and the terms agreed to in both those founding documents for New Zealand, who signed, who didn't, and all the associated history. Really quite interesting, actually. The other thing, actually, is that it's encouraged me to learn more about the history of my own whakapapa, so my own genealogy. Probably no surprise to anyone listening tonight that found out my hapu was actually quite politically active. And my rangatira was one of the last of the great chiefs. And our pa is actually named after Sir James Carroll, who was the first Māori acting Prime Minister. And the other place it's led me, I never thought I'd ever say this, is that I am on YouTube, like I said before, amusing to my teenage child, of course, but I'm not a YouTuber, just make that clear. And I think I can't thank all the Pākehā feminists and women who have informed me, who have taught me about feminism. I knew nothing about feminism, really, I'll be honest. So, from the bottom of my heart, I really thank everyone for helping me, for educating me. And I keep incredible company with the Wahine and Women's Action Group, and, here, WHRC, Women's Liberation Aotearoa, and of course, ManaWāhineKōrero. So, yeah.
Can you tell us a little about the opposition you've met and how this is impacting on you personally?
So far, all opposition that I'm aware of, by the way, probably a lot going on behind my back. I don't know. But what I'm aware of, it's mostly been fringe. So, people that really aren't an important part or a large part of my life. And I'd say that's because I'm a homeschooling parent. So my lifestyle is very, localized, if that makes sense, to around what my child and I do on a day-to-day basis. And the homeschooling parents that I associate with, they are all on board, which is so good, So, by the way, there are homeschooling families that aren't, of course, but, the ones that I associate with are. So I haven't really, come across any opposition. Obviously, I've had the rape threats, the death threats online and all that kind of stuff, but, I'm an old woman. I don't really let that get to me. Exactly. We've all had them, and I never take them seriously anyway. And again, regarding ManaWāhineKōrero, I'll be interested to see what kind of kickback we get from Māori, certain Māori back home, particularly those that are currently sitting in, Parliament. But yeah, that's yet to reveal itself. So for the most part, I've actually received more support. To be honest with you, I'm just more concerned if my whānau, if my family weren't on board, that would probably, make me a bit more ill at ease, but, they're supportive.
What are the next steps for you in your organisations? And do you have any suggestions for the Women's Human Rights Campaign or for attendees?
We don't really know yet. It depends on the outcome for ManaWāhineKōrero, at least, and Women's Liberation Aotearoa, I guess, what happens with these bills that are currently before the New Zealand Parliament, whether they'll pass or, if they'll pass, whether any of the amendments suggested will be taken on board, don't know. As far as ManaWāhineKōrero is concerned, though, we have made a direct claim in both our submissions that these bills are in direct breach of he whakaputanga and te tiriti o Waitangi. So, we'd have to step up to the plate on that, I guess, at some stage. So watch this space. Suggestions. I don't really have any suggestions other than, I guess just keep up with what everyone is doing. I'd like to say, the one thing that I'm, like I said, one of the things that I noticed about the transgender movement was the change in language. And of course, that connection that I made back to, the colonisation of my people. Language is very important, obviously. I'm sure everyone knows that. And, for me, this is just me personally, there's no such thing as trans woman, there's no such thing as transgender. There's no such thing. Men are men, woman are woman. That's it. Men who think that they're women are men still. So, I think if we can, at least try and, I guess just look at the language that we ourselves use in this fight, I think that might be a good thing. But other than that, I've really enjoyed myself tonight listening to both Virginia and Caroline. Thank you so much for your input. But yeah, so on that note, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.